The village sat quietly in the folds of green hills, where time didn't hurry much. A single road curved through it like a soft river, connecting small houses, fields, and the sound of wind. The roofs were made of red clay tiles that looked faded and chipped from rain. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, lazy lines, drifting into the morning fog. If you stood still long enough, you could hear almost everything: a dog barking far off, a wooden gate creaking, the faint clink of metal from a blacksmith's shed, and sometimes the gentle hush of the wheat bending in the breeze. People here didn't talk much about the past. They worked, they rested, and they kept their losses quiet. It wasn't out of coldness, just the way the place was. Everything had its season, even grief. At the edge of that village, near a slope where wildflowers grew in tangled colors, stood a small studio. It was made of stone, patched and old, with ivy climbing along the sides. The door was painted pale green, its paint peeling in thin curls. The windows were dusty most of the year, except one, the one where light always escaped at night, soft and golden, like a candle still burning after everyone else had gone to bed. That was Eliar's window. He wasn't an old man, though his hair had begun to gray at the sides. He looked like someone who had carried silence for too long and learned how to live with it. He moved slowly, spoke rarely, and painted as if it was breathing. Most people in the village had seen him at least once at the market, standing near the fruit stalls or walking home with bread tucked under his arm. He nodded to people when they greeted him, but never stayed for talk. Some said he used to be a school teacher before the fever came. Others said he was once a painter in the city who had left everything behind. No one knew the truth, and no one asked. All they knew was that when Eliar painted, things changed. It started many years ago. A woman had come to him. Her name was Mara, asking for her portrait. She had lost her son in an accident by the river and wanted something beautiful to look at, something to ease her heart. Eliar painted her by the window, sunlight on her hands. When she returned the next morning to take the portrait, she looked confused. She said she felt lighter, but couldn't remember why she had wanted the painting in the first place. She kept it anyway, smiling without knowing what she'd forgotten. After that, others came, one by one, quietly. A farmer who couldn't stop dreaming of fire. A tailor who still saw his wife every night in his sleep, though she'd been gone for years. A boy who carried guilt for something small but heavy. They all left the same way, calm, peaceful, and with a gap in their memories that didn't hurt anymore. No one could explain it. Eliar never said he was doing anything special. He didn't claim to heal or bless or curse. He only said he painted what he saw, And sometimes what he saw was more than what was in front of him inside his studio. The walls were filled with canvases turned backward. Stacks of unfinished work rested against the floor, covered in cloth. He didn't sell his art, not really. He kept them like memories he didn't want anyone else to find. The smell of oil, paint, and old wood hung heavy in the air. When he opened the windows, the wind made the brushes tremble in their jars, as if alive. Every morning started the same way. He'd wake just before sunrise, boil water, brew a small cup of coffee, strong, bitter, no sugar. Then sit by the table and look at the empty canvas in front of him. Sometimes he painted, sometimes he just sat there, watching the light crawl slowly across the wooden floor. He wasn't lonely, not in the way people thought. Loneliness, he believed, was only sharp when you had something to compare it to. But when you've lived inside, quiet for too long, it becomes a kind of shelter, a steady hum that wraps around you. He had stopped expecting letters or visits. He didn't need them, but there were nights, deep ones, when wind pressed against the windows and the lamp flickered when he'd stand by his shelves, touching the edges of old frames. His fingers would pause on one in particular, the first painting he'd ever made after his sickness. It was covered now with cloth, the fabric darkened by years of dust. He never looked at it anymore. He only kept it near, like a ghost he couldn't name. And sometimes, when he was half asleep, he thought he heard a voice from inside it, a soft voice saying his name. Not loud, just enough to make his heart twist a little. But by morning, it was gone. And he'd go back to painting and forgetting, and helping others forget too. Asterisk, there was one rule he never broke. He never painted himself. He told himself it was superstition, but deep down, he knew why. Each time he painted someone, he lost a piece of something, too. A small detail, a color, a smell, a dream. It didn't happen right away, but over the years, he noticed the gaps. The sound of a certain laugh he couldn't recall. The face of someone in an old photograph that no longer meant anything. Like pieces of his own past had dissolved into the paint. It didn't scare him anymore. He accepted it the way one accepts rain. It comes, it falls, and then it stops. The people he helped never questioned the price. They were too relieved, too grateful. Sometimes they returned years later, thanking him without remembering what for. He'd nod, smile faintly, and watch them walk away. He always painted their portraits face down, never hanging them on walls. There was a peace in that, a strange kind of mercy. That spring came softer than usual. The air smelled of pine and new rain. The hills turned a brighter green. Elliot started leaving his windows open longer. Birds nested in the corners of his roof. It was a season that carried memory, the kind that made people walk slower and look up more often. One afternoon, while he was cleaning his brushes, he heard footsteps outside. They stopped at the door. A soft knock followed, hesitant but steady. He dried his hands on a cloth and opened it. There stood a woman, her coat damp from rain. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands sticking to her face. Her eyes had the kind of tiredness that doesn't come from lack of sleep, the kind that comes from remembering too much. "Are you the painter?" she asked quietly. Elier nodded. They said, "You can help people forget." He didn't answer right away. He just stepped aside, and she entered. The smell of wet earth followed her in. She looked around at the brushes, the canvas, the quietness of the place. Her fingers brushed across the wooden table, leaving a trail through the dust. He asked her name. "Lyra," she said. The name sat in the air softly, like it belonged there. She told him she wanted to forget a love that had ended. Nothing more. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She just said, "I don't want to see his face when I close my eyes." Elier nodded once, as if he understood completely, and he did. He set up the easel, laid out his paints. The room was filled with the faint scrape of bristles, the scent of linseed oil, the sound of rain tapping the windows. She sat by the window, looking outside, her hands resting on her lap. He didn't ask her to pose. He painted from memory, or what he thought was memory, because as the strokes formed, her face felt familiar. Not in a general way, but deep, like remembering a dream you thought was gone. Her voice, the way she tilted her head when she paused, all of it stirred something in him. A warmth that felt like loss. He painted for hours. Light shifted across the room. Evening crept in slow and blue. By the time he placed the brush down, her eyes were closed. She had fallen asleep in the chair. He turned the painting around to look at it and froze. It wasn't her he had painted. It was himself. A younger self, standing beside her, holding her hand in a field of tall grass. A memory he didn't know he still carried. The sound of rain faded. Only his heartbeat filled the room. He stared at the painting for a long time, his breath unsteady. It was her. It had always been her. The woman from the covered canvas, the one he had tried to forget long ago. He had painted her out of his memory, and now she had come back, empty of the past. While he remembered everything, he sat beside her until morning, afraid to blink, afraid to lose that quiet moment, Morning came quiet. Gray light pressed softly through the window. The rain had stopped, leaving drops on the glass that caught bits of pale sun. Lyra was still asleep in the chair, her hands resting on her coat. Her breathing was calm, For a moment, Elier just watched her. He felt like a child standing in the ruins of an old dream, afraid to move, afraid to wake her, afraid she might vanish if he did. When she finally stirred, she blinked at the light, then at him. "Did I sleep here?" she asked, her voice soft, unsure. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's all right." She smiled faintly. The kind of smile that looks borrowed, fragile. She looked at the painting covered with cloth. "Is it done?" He nodded. "It's done." She didn't ask to see it. She didn't even look curious. Just thanked him quietly and reached for her coat. Before leaving, she paused by the door. "Will it work?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, then said, "Yes, you'll sleep well tonight." She hesitated, maybe wanting to say something else, but only nodded and stepped out. The sound of her footsteps faded down the path, swallowed by wind. Elior stood there long after she'd gone. His hands still smelled of paint. His chest felt heavy, as if something had shifted inside it. Something that had been buried for years and had suddenly remembered how to breathe. He turned to the painting again, uncovered it slowly. There they were, himself and her, younger, standing in the field where wildflowers grew taller than their knees. She had been painting beside him that day, laughing when the wind kept stealing her hat. He could almost hear her voice again. The color of it, the warmth. He felt the ache of remembering too much, all at once. He tried to push it away. He told himself he had done what she asked. He had taken her pain. But the truth was simpler and crueler. He hadn't erased her sorrow. He had stolen it. It was his now. The next days passed quietly. He still worked, painted for others, listened to their stories, but the colors no longer looked the same. Everything carried a trace of her. The blue of the river, the yellow in the fields, even the smell of oil and wood. All of it pulled him back to her face, her voice, her hands resting on her knees. He started forgetting small things again, where he kept his brushes, whether he'd eaten that day, what month it was. The more he painted for others, the more his own memories twisted. Some nights, he'd wake up and not know if he had dreamed of her, or if she had actually been there. The villagers noticed a change in him. He spoke less, smiled less. He looked tired, not from work, but from something deeper, something invisible. One afternoon, the baker's daughter came by to ask for a portrait. She wanted to forget her fear of the river after nearly drowning as a child. Elier agreed, but when he began to paint, he couldn't see her clearly. Her face kept turning into Lyra's. He tried to focus, but his hand trembled. The brush slipped, leaving a streak of color across the canvas that looked almost like light through water. He stared at it for a long time, then told the girl to come back another day. After she left, he sat on the floor, his head in his hands. He felt the edges of his mind blur, as if too many paintings were bleeding into each other. When evening came, he lit a small lamp and uncovered the painting of himself and Lyra again. He traced her face with his fingers, careful, almost reverent. The paint was dry now, but the eyes looked alive, deep, steady, full of something that pulled him closer. He whispered her name once. It felt strange in his mouth, like saying it for the first time in years. Then he heard a knock. He opened the door. It was her. Lyra stood outside, her coat damp again, though the night was clear. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. "I kept hearing something in my head. A voice. It said your name." Elie stepped aside without a word. She came in, looking around as if she'd been there before, but couldn't remember when. Her hand brushed the edge of the table. Her eyes fell on the covered painting. "What's under that?" she asked. He froze, then said, "You don't need to see it." But she stepped closer, drawn by something she didn't understand. Her fingers reached for the cloth. Before he could stop her, she pulled it away. The air in the room shifted. She looked at the painting. Her breath caught. Her face changed confusion first, then pain. Her hand trembled as she touched the surface, the field, the light, the two figures holding hands. "I know this place," she whispered. Her voice broke on the words. "I've been there." Telia couldn't move. He felt the weight of it, all those years of silence collapsing into one moment. "You painted me," she said softly. "You made me forget." He tried to speak, but no words came. The truth hung heavy between them, raw and fragile. Tears slipped down her face. She wasn't angry, just sad in a way that felt older than both of them. "Why did you do it?" she asked. He looked at her. The woman he had loved, the one he had lost, the one he had erased to survive himself. "I couldn't bear it," he said quietly. "I thought forgetting would save me, and maybe you too." She closed her eyes. For a long while, neither spoke, only the sound of the wind moving through the trees outside. Then she turned toward him, her voice low. "Do you still paint what's inside people?" He nodded slowly. "Then paint this," she said, touching his chest. "All of this, every piece of what we were. And when you're done, forget again." He wanted to say no, but her eyes looked at him like dawn, soft, certain, unafraid. And he knew he couldn't keep carrying this memory. Not again. He began painting that night. He didn't light the lamp. He worked in half-darkness, guided by instinct, by breath. The colors mixed like dusk, blue and gray, and a quiet kind of gold. Lyra sat by the window, silent. He painted until his hands ached. Each stroke felt like a goodbye. When it was done, he set the brush down. She walked over, looked at it once, then smiled. This time, it wasn't a sad smile, just soft, accepting. "Thank you," she whispered. She leaned forward, kissed his cheek, and left. The door closed behind her with a sound like the last page of a book. Elier stood there for a long time. The painting shimmered faintly in the light. He felt the world tilt gently, like a boat drifting away from shore. In the days that followed, he stopped painting, stopped eating much, stopped opening the door. He could feel himself fading, not sick, not broken, just slowly emptying, like a candle running out of wax. Sometimes he'd wake and not remember her name again. Sometimes he'd remember everything and whisper it into the quiet, hoping the air would keep it for him. And one morning, when the sun rose over the hills, the villagers saw his window dark for the first time. When they went inside, the studio was clean, silent, still. No one was there. Only one painting remained, a meadow full of wildflowers, soft wind moving through the grass. No people, no shadows, just the calm hum of something finished. And when you looked long enough, you felt something stir, like the faint trace of a dream you almost remembered. You almost remembered. Morning light filled the village slowly, touching rooftops and stone fences, and the wet earth still carrying last night's rain. The air smelled like green leaves and smoke from early fires. Somewhere, a rooster called once, then went quiet again. It was a calm morning, the kind that comes after a long storm. When the world feels clean and emptied, down the slope, near the end of the road, the painter's studio sat still. No window light, no sound of brushes, no sign of movement. The baker's wife noticed it first. She was carrying bread to the fields, and when she passed the door, she felt something strange, not fear, just a stillness that made her stop. She knocked softly. No answer. She waited, listening. Only the wind. Finally, she pushed the door open. The smell inside was faint oil paint, dry wood, dust. The air felt heavy, but not cold, as if the room had been holding its breath for too long. She stepped in, her eyes moving across the floor, the shelves, the open jars, the empty chair. Then she saw the canvas standing by the wall. It showed a meadow under soft light, painted with such quiet care. It felt alive. The grass bent gently in an unseen wind. Tiny flowers glowed in patches of yellow and blue, and in the distance, the hills curved like waves caught in slow motion. No sky, no sun, no people, just space and peace. She called for him, softly at first, then louder, but only her own voice answered, echoing off the walls. She stepped closer to the painting, The closer she looked, the stranger it felt. She could almost hear something, a hum, a whisper, maybe wind moving through the brushstrokes. It wasn't frightening. It was gentle, like someone breathing far away. When she told the others, a few villagers came to see. They stood in silence, hats in hand. No one touched anything. They all felt it, that quiet, that warmth. Someone said he must have left for the city. Someone else said maybe he was traveling to find new work. But the truth sat between them, unspoken, as if they all knew better. He hadn't gone anywhere. He had simply gone back. In the weeks that followed, the studio stayed as it was. No one moved his brushes or covered his table. The door stayed unlocked, and sometimes people went inside just to sit. There was something peaceful in that room, something that made your heartbeat slow down. A man who had lost his wife came once and sat there for an hour, looking at the meadow. He said it made his chest feel lighter. A child came too, curious, and said she dreamed of walking inside that painting. The grass brushing her hands. Little by little, people stopped bringing flowers to the graveyard and started leaving them near his window instead. No one said why. They just did. Seasons turned. Grass grew taller around the path. The paint on the green door peeled a little more each year, but the painting stayed bright, untouched by time or dust, as if the air itself protected it. One evening, years later, a traveler came through the village. He was a painter too, young and restless, carrying a satchel full of sketches and small jars of pigment. He stopped at the inn and heard people speak softly about the man who painted memory. Curious, he went to see the old studio. When he stepped inside, the air changed. The place smelled faintly of rain and turpentine, though it had been long since anyone worked there. He walked slowly, his boots quiet on the floorboards. Then he saw the painting. He stood in front of it for a long time. Something about it made his throat tighten. He couldn't explain why. It felt like remembering something he'd never lived, like a dream from another life. He leaned closer. The brushwork was delicate, each blade of grass soft but certain, and in the very center, if you looked long enough, you could see faint outlines, barely there, of two shapes standing hand in hand. So faint, they might have been tricks of the eye or reflections from the window. But he was sure they were there, he whispered, beautiful without meaning to. And when he blinked, for a moment, he thought he saw movement in the meadow, the grass parting slightly, as if someone had just walked through it. He smiled quietly and stepped back. Before leaving, he placed a single brush on the table, then closed the door, slow and careful, like closing a page that wasn't his to finish. Years passed again. The village changed in small ways. New roofs, new fences, new names. But the studio stayed. People still went there sometimes, mostly when they couldn't sleep or when their hearts felt heavy. They'd sit in front of the meadow and breathe, and somehow they always left lighter. Some said they saw the painter in dreams, a calm man with kind eyes, holding a brush dipped in dawn light. Others said when the wind was right, you could hear two voices near the hills, quiet and laughing. No one tried to explain it anymore. They just let it be what it was. A place where things ended gently, where memory rested. And somewhere inside that meadow, under soft, endless light, Elier and Lyra walked together again. No pain, no forgetting, just grass moving around their legs, the smell of wildflowers, and the sound of wind that never stopped. The light stayed warm on their faces. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every breath was enough. And if you stood close enough to that painting, very close, and listened, you might swear you could hear them breathing still, breathing still.